Hey
Hello.
man,
You got me?
can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. How's my sound?
Good.
I had a little snafu. I just traveled from Thailand back to Canada, and I think I injured some gear along the way, so I'm on a new mic. Is it all
Oh
coming
man.
through at the right level and clearly and stuff?
Yeah, no, you sound great.
Oh, perfect. How's it going, man?
It's good, dude. Just in school, chilling, listening to a lot of Bitcoin stuff.
Like all of us. I was just thinking. So I got home 2 days ago, and haven't seen anybody yet, like friends or anything. It's Friday night, right?
Yeah.
It's quarter to six on Friday night. And I'm like, there's no place I'd rather be than, sitting at my computer talking to somebody about Bitcoin, which, like, I don't know if that's a good or a bad. I mean, obviously, I think it's a good thing, but, it's definitely a weird thing. But here we are.
It's wild. It's really wild. It's the Bitcoin rabbit hole can almost be like isolating in some ways because you just can't talk to people about it in depth and you want to and I don't know.
Well, man, I mean, that's a huge part of the motivation for me doing this pod. Like, I was piecing together these conversations over the years, just, when I had the opportunity. And it just got to the point where you feel the need to have the, like, you're consuming all this content material, right? And you're having all these thoughts, and you're having all these like mind exploding realizations about stuff. You're like, fuck, I need to talk to somebody about this shit. And like, you try to talk
Yeah.
to somebody in your normal life, and they're just looking at you and blink with blank stares, and like, holy
Yeah.
fuck, John is really messed up, isn't he? So
Yeah,
the
no, they feel bad for you.
yeah, exactly. So the beauty of Bitcoin Twitter, when you happen upon it, is like, holy shit, I found my people. Like, I can finally communicate with somebody.
It's really weird, and I don't know. It's definitely left me frustrated with my like outside of Bitcoin Twitter. It's I don't know. It's hard to go back from these massive ideas to just sort of like everyday small talk for like long periods of time. It's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't want to seem
But
like a dick, right? Like, you don't want to go to
no,
social events and be like all high and mighty, like, how
no,
come
you
you
don't want to
fucking
be that
idiots
guy.
don't know about Bitcoin,
Yeah. No, you can't do that.
Yeah.
But you'll
Um,
probably like I definitely was that guy for like a very small period of time, and then I was like, this is not gonna happen. Like you can't red pill people. Like you can't just like force them
No,
to
you realize
succeed.
very
Like there's
very quickly
yeah
that that's kind of a dead end, which is why so much of the conversation these days, or part of it at least, is like, trying to, well, first of all, deciding, is it a worthwhile endeavor to even try to red pill people and try to, foster adoption? And if you think that it is in some capacity, then,
yeah
what's the best way to do that? And for me, it's starting to kind of coalesce that, more so than, because nobody wants to hear me go on like a history of money, 2 hour tangent at a social
yeah
event or something. But
yeah
I'm finding the thing that people respond to the most is obviously, the life you construct for yourself. People see that, and they, if they like certain elements of it, they'll be curious about it. But for me, it's enthusiasm. Like, people respond to enthusiasm, and they may think you're overly enthusiastic, but enthusiasm definitely has kind of an infectious sort of thing to it. So that's kind of where I hang out now. If I allow myself to go down there, if I'm with a group of people that I know there's just gonna be no like play at all, then
yeah
I don't even bother.
yeah. I don't even bother either.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's true. I think relentless positivity and just like I don't know. I also feel like there's some level of just like a lot of people know something's fucked up and they don't really know how to articulate it, but it's sort of in the broader consciousness that like something is wrong. And then sort of just like going down that and then like, if only there was something that could prevent this from happening. And you're like kind of just riffing on that, I think is one way of doing it, like starting with the problem first, but it's not easy. It's never
No,
easy.
like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just so problems of the nature that are occurring in society today, and that, we often discuss on Bitcoin Twitter or on these podcasts. They're so multifaceted, and there's so many
Yeah.
variables in them that it's, it's really hard to have a discussion with somebody who's probably on some level emotional about it, right? Whether it's disenfranchisement, or whether it's unemployment, or whether it's,
Yeah.
whatever the issue is. Like, there's probably an underlying emotion that's actually, in most people, fairly strong. And if you just try to, like, go in and tell them that their assumptions on which they're basing this emotional reaction are incorrect or misplaced, they're not, it's hard to overcome the immediate kind of rejection of that approach.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but like is always said, I mean, this shit. I mean, who would have thought in 10 years, almost 11 years, we'd be here? So, it doesn't need us cheerleading for it.
No, it doesn't. I mean, this is just the natural effect of it. And this is just part of the exponential network effects as they continue.
However, that being
Yeah.
said, fuck that shit. I'm definitely cheerleading for this because I like it, and I do. I the aspect of being historically right. I'm gonna let my ego have that one, and I'm gonna I'll be happy to hang my reputation on that one. And if we're wrong, then whatever. But if we're right, I'll take the pat on the back. I don't mind
Do
it.
you ever think of your Twitter feed as like this nice little gym that you're like creating and you're going to look back on it in 20 years and be like, interesting prediction.
I,
Yes.
I haven't
It's
thought.
almost like I saw this coming.
I haven't thought about it in those terms, but now I will. But I have thought about it in like creating a little like Bitcoin Twitter toilet book, of just like the best little, maybe even like explaining Bitcoin through Bitcoin Twitter toilet book. So like you take the monetary aspect or the network effect aspect or the, value transfer over a digital protocol or whatever, and like put
Yeah.
the best like little tweet threads or individual tweets that people have put out and just put it in a toilet book so people can just like page through it when they're sitting down having a crap.
Yeah, just put it in a pamphlet and then put it in all these restrooms like across the country.
Yeah, one shit at a time. Bitcoin adoption. Well, look, man. Thanks for coming on and doing this. I really appreciate it, and I've been enjoying your writing and your tweets and stuff like that over the last little while. And usually I do these and they're pretty free flowing, but just because of the nature of the stuff you've written about, and I think probably because I've gotten into a couple, Twitter spats recently on those exact subjects, that I'd like to maybe spend a little bit of time at least initially on those,
Yeah.
and then we can see where that goes. But the two that seem to come up a lot, and I think it's because Peter Schiff and the Gold Bug, people are always very vocal, ironically very vocal critics of Bitcoin. And the two kind of arguments that they make is one, Bitcoin has no intrinsic value, and another one, which is probably maybe a bit less common but still comes up a lot, is that it's deflationary, and this has a lot of negative effects, for investment and
hmm
for savings and for wages and all that kind of stuff. So
hmm
maybe we can just start with and maybe your summary or your view on this has changed since you actually wrote the articles. But for people that haven't yet wrapped their head around the Bitcoin has no intrinsic value argument, why don't you slap them in the face with your take on it?
Yeah, so the intrinsic value argument is generally waved around by someone like Peter Schiff, who says, a real form of money has to have some sort of use outside of money. That with something like gold, for example, the reason that gold is a good monetary unit is because we can use it in all these great ways. We can use it in dentistry and aerospace and technology and computers and things like that. And because it has those industrial uses, that it therefore has intrinsic value that is, part of the good. And so I take that and flip that on its head, and I actually think that they've got it completely backwards. That those intrinsic use cases, the fact that they can be used as commodities in other industries, actually is a net negative to the monetary value of an object. And that's because what you want for a money is you want a type of pure monetary good. You want it to be as clean as possible and as solely focused on its monetary properties as possible. So when we talk about a money, we talk about something that's scarce, durable, verifiable, transportable, divisible, fungible, all of those good monetary characteristics that make something a useful unit for communicating value. And gold has a bunch of those units, or has a bunch of those properties. So it is very durable. It's very scarce. It's got a nice value to weight ratio. It has a lot of those good monetary characteristics. That is the reason why it has outcompeted other forms of money over the years. but it also has these industrial uses. And when you think of money, you think of money as a way of communicating value and a way of signaling prices. You want that communication to be as clear as possible, right? Because just like a language, you want your ideas to come across cleanly. You don't want there to be some interference in that communication. And so if your money is pure, it doesn't have outside industrial uses, something like Bitcoin, then those ideas are not distorted. They come across clearly. But when you have outside industrial uses, so for example, let's say we find some new industrial use for gold that was previously undiscovered, and we're using gold as how we're measuring our prices, then that sort of industrial use can start to tug on that medium that we're using for communicating prices and sort of cause distortion throughout our markets. And so my argument is that it's actually, Bitcoin's pureness, its lack of any outside commodity uses, the fact that it is just this digital ledger, will result in a much cleaner system for communicating value.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that view. And I think even that's fairly in line with at least some of the Austrians' view on money, right? Which is kind of weird why the gold bugs don't see it that way, because a lot of the gold bugs are Austrians or have, believe in the Austrian school.
Right. There's definitely, I mean, just from Mises himself, he said, gold is kind of our least bad option. And specifically in the article, I reference a passage where he said, gold's good, but it does have industrial uses that do make it not perfect for communicating value. And it'd be great if we could use something that didn't even have these industrial uses.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that gold bugs kind of get hung up on this is understandable in the sense that, this is what they've believed for so long, and there's that sort of confirmation bias that you want to look for reasons to reject something new because you've held on to the past for so long. And someone like Peter Schiff, his entire career is around gold being good, and it's really hard to let that go. I mean, it's really just a psychological thing, I think, at that point.
Yeah, and I think guys like Peter Schiff, and I had a back and forth with Roy Sabag, who's the CEO of Gold Money recently.
Mm-hmm.
We can't really be expecting these guys to have this debate in good faith. Their entire businesses, or especially in the case of Roy, but in the case of Peter as well, is predicated on a gold business. So
Yeah.
they're not going to just in a Twitter exchange be like, you know what, you're right, I thought about it, and you guys are totally right. So I'm not holding my breath for either of those guys or people like them to change. But I think just in having these back and forth, and with Peter, it's just, it's kind of just, fun at this point. It's just absurdity, and the stuff that he says on Twitter and the stuff that people comment on. And I'm part of that, it's just for fun, really. But when it's actually a decent exchange about the merits of gold versus other forms of money and obviously Bitcoin, even though I don't think they're going to capitulate, I like having them because obviously it sharpens my argument as well. And if there's any holes in my way of seeing their side of the argument, then I'm interested in understanding what those are. But
Totally.
I think a lot of those people are, and like you said, it's understandable. I think they're overly romantic about it. Gold has been this very important part of our history for pretty much all of civilization, and if anything was important, it was covered in gold. It was they held gold. King Tut's stuff is in gold. Like anything that's like really valuable and amazing is in gold, but it's still just a shiny rock. Like I hate to say it because I know everyone values it so much, but it's just a rock. And with Roy, he said, gold is money by design. And my response was, no, gold is money by happenstance. It has the attributes that gold has makes it a better form of money for the functions that we desire of it than anything else that we could find in nature. And ultimately we settled, we came to a conclusion on the little dialogue with him saying, I don't believe money can be created by man. It has to be created by nature. And so, with that kind of a divide, we can't really continue the debate with gold versus Bitcoin. But yeah,
I think you're onto something really good there, the happenstance versus design portion, because gold happen to have the best monetary properties in nature. And if we in our and that was really the brilliance of Satoshi, and whether or not it was accidental or intentional, I don't know or really care. But the fact is, when you if you were to sit and think, okay, what are the monetary properties that make gold valuable? What is the actual logical reason for why this value accumulated to gold? And you extract that and you say, okay, how do we improve every single one of these properties in a 10x fashion? You create Bitcoin.
Right.
And because you can apply human design to something that was already, had good properties, and you can understand those properties, then you have something that just blows it out of the water.
Yeah. And I think a lot is, and someone will get off of Peter Schiff in a moment, I promise. But someone like him always says, like, well, what's backing Bitcoin? And he I don't know if people ever ask him, but like, what's backing gold? It's certainly not the
Right.
fact that people use it for cavities or fucking, computers or whatever.
Right.
What's backing gold is its attributes and the
Exactly.
energy required to extract it from the earth.
Exactly.
That's what's backing gold. And what's backing Bitcoin? Its attributes and the work required to bring it into existence. And then there's the third part that, or another aspect which I think gets discussed less because it's a little bit more vague, and maybe we can break into this a little bit. But
Hmm.
obviously, with money, there is a social component to it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even though the attributes inspire the confidence in a money, people
Hmm.
still have to recognize it as such. And so with gold, it seems like it was kind of an emergent thing over time. With Bitcoin, I would say that recognition is far more like overt or intentional. Have you thought about that component of it?
I think that's actually a huge component of why they don't understand Bitcoin, because they believe that it comes from the social inertia or the recognition. And, I think it's attributes lead to recognition, and that kind of creates this circular effect where people start using something as the most saleable good. Um, and because it has been, thousands of years since we went from the attribute to recognition phase in gold, I feel like there's almost this like collective forgetting of why gold was even recognized as valuable in the first place. And so with Bitcoin, we're seeing that, kind of start again. We're seeing the attributes lead to the recognition. And I think you're definitely right that this sort of recognition phase can be easy to dismiss in the early stages because not enough people have recognized it yet. And I think that's also another common way to dismiss Bitcoin, which is, well, no one else believes it. And because Bitcoin is just a subjective belief, that therefore we should just, understand that it probably won't catch on. And I think that that's a very narrow view of kind of the way that these sorts of technologies exponentially are recognized as the network effects allow for new possibilities of human interaction. So, for example, you could see the exact same thing with language. Language is a way of communicating subjective values and emotions, but ultimately, languages are intersubjective channels of communication with real characteristics. And if my language was incredibly inefficient and a new language came along that allowed me to express myself in much better, more fluid ways, to express emotions that weren't previously possible in my prior language, then over time, that language, the original, shittier language, would die off. And the more efficient or more creative language, or the one that allows a better expression of subjective values, would come to dominate.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that thousands of times in history. And money is something that you can see that exact same process happening with, but it's much faster than something like a language because you just drop the old one and buy the new one instead of having to unlearn and relearn and all the messy stuff that would happen with something like a language.
Yeah. So what do you think would be the response, or what would happen, or maybe maybe we've seen it in some capacity already, but let's say Bitcoin could be improved in some way, in some fundamental way,
Mm-hmm.
and someone did that and launched a new network. What would keep, or Basically, what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get, if something better was created,
Yeah.
what I'm trying to maybe bring about an example that actually showcases that the social, like the decision making, the
I
recognition
see.
aspect of this. So if something better came along, what would
Yeah.
keep Bitcoin from, from being displaced by that?
Yeah. Let's say something somehow is a 10x improvement in Bitcoin in every way, that we can't even imagine right now because it doesn't exist.
Right.
And Adam Back has talked about this, and I think he has a very good understanding of it, which is that the UTXO set of Bitcoin, the distribution of value amongst these people, has created a table of shared recognition, a table of who has slices of this pie, and that if we do, because we now have a digital ledger of the shared recognition system, um, if there is some sort of 10x improvement, the best way to utilize that new 10x improved Bitcoin 2.0 would just be to transport the UTXO set over to the new one.
Mm-hmm.
So there you've bootstrapped the belief system because those people are already have the exact same property rights in the new one as they did in the old one, but you just have, you can kind of swap out and upgrade it, which makes a ton of sense to me. And I think that's how we would see some sort of upgrade like that moving forward, even if Bitcoin is the first iteration. So much value is just in the distribution of property amongst many self-interested individuals.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's how it would go down. And also, I just don't think you can replicate the Immaculate Conception of
Exactly.
Bitcoin. I mean, it's it now, so it's going to be
Yeah.
Bitcoin or its UTXO set, or probably, yeah,
Exactly.
it's going to be
And
that.
in either case, you hold Bitcoin to get your ticket into Bitcoin 2.0 or whatever it is.
Right.
And any sort and that's simply because, like you said, the Immaculate Conception, it is so hard to create organic growth. It is so hard. And organic systems are naturally anti-fragile. I'm a big fan of Taleb when he talks about the difference between a mechanical and organic system. And Bitcoin's organic growth over the past decade is just unbelievably difficult to recreate, because those initial people had to go through those phases of disbelief and sell and redistribute and sell, and it goes up and it redistributes. And there's really no way to get such a great distribution compared to, all right, we created a new coin. We're not going to use Bitcoin's UTXO. We're just going to like pre-mine 70% of it like Ethereum or something. And you're just not going to get that same organic network effect. So yeah, it's the only hope I think would just be moving the UTXO over.
Yeah. Man,
Yeah.
it's so crazy that we're here at the time, like you just said, the way that the organic nature of its adoption, when someone valued a Bitcoin at sub a penny, right? And then someone
Yeah.
valued a Bitcoin at over $1, and then a group of people valued a Bitcoin at over 10, and we're actually watching the emergence of a new money in real time. It's like, I
Yeah.
think that's why we're so crazy about it, and that we want to have all these, we want to interact with other people that see it, because
Yeah.
once you realize how significant this is, and actually I just read Tur de Meester's piece tonight. I don't know if you've read that, but it was kind of comparing it to the Reformation.
It's on my list. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that was a special moment in time. I think will be far eclipsed by this moment in time. But the point that he makes is just that, the emergence of this thing will create a very dramatic shift in the structure of society and,
Yeah.
how things function. And I mean, it's obviously very, very hard to predict how this will play out, but just the simple fact that we're consciously and intentionally giving birth to a better form of, as you said, communicating value than we've ever had before is like, man, I get goosebumps just talking about it.
It's crazy, and you want to run outside and just start shaking people, and you can't. But it's weird, man, and I feel like it's also terrifying in a way. And with this, I was just reading The Sovereign Individual again, and that the book, I think when Bitcoiners talk about it, we talk about how incredible this new form of liberation and human rights are going to be able to be expressed in this digital economy. But there's also some really terrifying parts of that book, because that transformation is a massive shakeup of power around the world, and it's hard to know exactly if that will be peaceful. And based on who has stakes in the current game, chances are it's probably not going to be very peaceful. And so it's weird. I feel myself just kind of struggling with two sides of it, especially seeing things like what's happening in so many countries right now, in Hong Kong and in Lebanon and Chile and Venezuela and the Spanish independence movement in France and populism in the United States and the UK. I mean, it's something is bubbling and it's not going to come without a cost. And I think that eventually, we're at this historical moment where, you know, this overreach and this sort of, I would say, this parasitic institution of nation states consistently just robbing their individuals and replacing their money with debt, that has to be digested in some way. And, we have to get through that and kind of let go of it. And I can't, there's no way it's going to be pretty. And I think Ray Dalio's piece was also pretty intriguing on that because, he lays it out in very, very simple, short terms. But the truth is, given the nature of the nation state and the promises that are being made through debt, someone is like, not just someone, many, many, many people are going to have promises that they've depended on for decades broken.
Yeah.
And it's going to be ugly. And luckily, Bitcoin gives us kind of like, I think, like a pressure release valve or a safety, a place that we can like find safety. But I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Bitcoin is that car driving alongside the train that's about to run off the tracks, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, you're trying to jump onto the car as the train is going.
Yeah.
And look, I totally agree with everything you just said. But the thing that gives me at least some solace is that prior to Bitcoin, I saw the exact same thing, except there was no car. It was just the train going off the tracks, And so,
yeah, no, I had a tweet about this where I was like, I'm so glad I realized that our financial system is insolvent after learning about Bitcoin because it would have been really scary the other way around.
Yeah.
And I can't, I mean, like, I knew, I think a lot of people have some sort of vague feeling that things are wrong, but when you really run the numbers and you're like, all right, millions of people are not going to get their pensions. How, like, when you really just look at the numbers, it starts getting really scary.
Yeah.
And it's easy to not think about that.
Yeah, well, I realized things were fucked before Bitcoin. So, I've talked about this before on the podcast, but that has an effect on the way you see the world, right? And you're like, well, fuck, how should I move forward with this sort of perception on things? Notwithstanding that, the perception no doubt is wrong in some capacity, but probably clear enough that you're in the ballpark of being correct. And and this is why so many people talk about when they encounter Bitcoin and they work their way down the rabbit hole, that it actually, I mean, this is across the board. Bitcoin gives people hope. I mean, that's like a word
totally.
that just emerges in every conversation I have, is that yes, all the cool stuff and Orange Coin good, number go up, everything like that, but it's hope, not just for you as an individual, but for everything. And you're probably right, because it's hard to imagine how a smooth transition, but one, hopefully at least like the scaffolding is being put up on the house that's getting torn down, and so there's some sort of support. And I think it's probably pretty safe bet to say that Bitcoin is going to be scapegoated at some point, whether it's destroying the environment, whether it's these people are getting rich on it, whether it's criminals hiding tax dollars. That's why we don't have enough money to fund your pension, because all these people are avoiding taxes through Bitcoin and all this kind of stuff. So I see it being scapegoated. But one of the areas where I diverge from most people that I've spoken to on this subject is, obviously in Bitcoin there's privacy is a huge thing, right? And a lot of people take that to the degree where they keep their, they stay anonymous and they don't talk about certain things. And I totally get and respect that. But I think if we're going to have any chance at overcoming the attempts at scapegoating, we've got to be out there showing people who we are and what this is about. And, maybe through all the different people that engage in media in this space, and, all the people that talk, like, maybe we can mitigate the degree to which Bitcoin can be scapegoated by saying, hey, no, like, that's not what this is about. This is about something else. You're being lied to. You're being misdirected. And I know maybe that's overly optimistic, because we're dealing with very, big forces here. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Can't help but try.
I think you're definitely onto something there that I hadn't thought about as much. But the privacy is very important in a way, because no matter what happens, like you need both, because the private people are kind of like not necessarily the threat, but it's the proof that even if you want to do something, you can't do it, because there are so many hodlers that are OPSEC magicians, and they're not, like, you just can't get to them because you don't know who or where they are. And that's incredible. And no matter how much you try to take out the few people who are talking about it publicly, Bitcoin is going to bootstrap itself privately regardless.
Mm-hmm.
And, I do think people who are more public, like myself and you, that's also very important, because I think you're right. Like, for the average person to latch on to these sorts of ideas, we're still monkeys, and we still like to see someone's face and name and believe them. And it's a form of just very basic credibility that allows us to think outside of what Jerome Powell or Donald Trump is saying.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good way of framing it, actually.
And you could compare it to coming out of the closet in a variety of different domains, right? Like, whether it's with homosexuality, and you realize, oh, my neighbor Bob he's gay, and he looks like a totally normal dude, and he's mowing his lawn, and he's just like me. Or, I'm very much interested in psychedelics and the work that's been done there over the last 20 years. And, once you have people like Tim Ferriss and, top entrepreneurs and Peter Thiel and all these guys coming out and saying, it's not about like getting super fucked up and hippie stuff. It's about something more. And here's the science that backs it up. And this is why we do it. And you realize, oh, so people that are interested in this aren't just crazy hippies. They're actually top performers and, insightful thinkers and all this kind of stuff. And that has an effect on how people perceive these things. So I think, probably something like that is worthwhile or would be good for Bitcoin.
Yeah, and makes the attack, if a nation state was to attack Bitcoin or go after Bitcoiners, it makes it more costly to their reputation.
Right.
Because a Bitcoiner, he's a great guy, and he's talking about these very admirable missions of improving access to financial networks and things like that. And when you talk about, the basic human rights Bitcoin provides, suddenly it becomes much less popular for someone like Elizabeth Warren to scapegoat Bitcoiners as evil speculators or something like that.
Yeah, totally agree. Loud and proud, baby.
Yeah.
So the most recent article you did was Bitcoin is not deflationary, right?
That's right.
All right. Why don't you hit me with that one?
So deflation is a tricky idea, and I hear it mentioned regarding Bitcoin a lot. Typically from people of, they're pretty sophisticated. They are usually, your Warren Buffett types or people that kind of, they care about investing. They care about kind of the general economic outlook, and they have a basic understanding of economics, but they're not Austrians, and they're not down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And a common argument against Bitcoin is, well, it's deflationary, and that deflation is sort of this evil boogeyman that we need to prevent because it would lead to some sort of economic catastrophe if prices started to go down. And so I first wanted to just unpack the term deflationary because it can be pretty messy when I think the common understanding when you hear Jerome Powell talk about deflation, he's talking about prices going down. And when he talks about inflation, he's talking about prices going up. And that's a messy definition because prices can go up or down for a variety of reasons. And so when you talk about deflation as price levels, you're not sure if the prices are going up because of a change in productivity or a decrease in productivity, or if there's a change in the underlying monetary base, the way you're communicating those prices that is causing the prices to change. And so the first part of the article is saying, to be really clear, we need to define deflation in terms of changes to the actual monetary base or monetary substitutes. So, like dollars in a fractional reserve bank, because that allows us to understand why prices are moving, because it is a change in the unit we're using to measure prices versus, well, it just got a lot cheaper to produce these things, so prices went down. So anyways, my first argument is saying, look, when you define deflation in a strict sense of is the monetary base changing, it's not deflationary. It's actually disinflationary because it is scheduled to be a constant over a period of 100 years or so. Like 2140, we'll have 21 million coins, and we're trying to get a constant monetary base. And this goes back to the idea of prices are a way of communicating value, or your money is a way of communicating value, and that's accounted for in prices. And so you want that method of communication to be constant. You want it to be pure. You want it to be you don't want it to be disrupted by the thing that you're using to measure. You don't want your meter stick to sort of like be moving around on you. You want it to be as nice and stable as possible. And so a nice constant monetary base is the best for communicating prices effectively. And then I also addressed some concerns that, well, what about the lost coins? Isn't that basically a form of deflation over time because those coins are being taken out of circulation? And my argument for that is, well, the highest amounts of lost coins are also at the highest. So in the earliest days, we lost the most coins, presumably because people were reckless. They didn't have any sorts of good cold storage. And, there weren't sorts of ways that right now you can have like multiple backups of your keys or something like that. And you can have emergency plans. Those weren't really in place. And there's stories of people losing thousands of coins. But those big losses happen at the very earliest stages when lots of new Bitcoin was hitting the market every 10 minutes. And, as we sort of level off and Bitcoin production slows down, we'll also get more professional in our custody, and we'll be better at securing, large amounts of Bitcoin wealth. And so we'll also see the amount of lost coins kind of level off as well. And so we can see a nice equilibrium there. And the other is in terms of population. That's another thing. Like, what if we just have like billions and billions of people and there's a smaller and smaller amount of Bitcoin relative to people? And, by the time Bitcoin levels off, there's, based on our best population estimates, it's predicted that population will also be somewhat leveled off by then. I think that one's less important, and I don't think it's as big of a deal, but it's an interesting, kind of note that it's come up in like random arguments I've had with people. So I just kind of threw that in there. But that's the general idea of deflation in a strict sense of decreases in the monetary supply, not going to happen, and Bitcoin's going to be good for communicating prices.
Mm-hmm. Now, that definition of deflation is contentious, right? Like some people define deflation as prices going down. Other people define deflation as the money supply shrinking, let's say. Right? And so that is, if you can't agree on the definition when we have these conversations or these debates, then we can't even start to have them, right?
Totally. And I fully expected that when I published the article, and that's why, I continue in the article, and I'm like, look, even if you're defining it as falling prices, let me tell you why falling prices under Bitcoin are going to be perfectly fine and natural in the economy.
Yeah. And what was the effect on prices, wages, and the operation of debt during the gold standard era, if you know? And how do you think those three things would be impacted by Bitcoin being, let's say, like the dominant money in a hyper Bitcoinized world?
Yeah, so so let me take each of those in turn. So the first is prices, and we can imagine that because humans are naturally creative creatures, and we figure out new and better ways to do things all the time. Productivity has just been an upward trend since the beginning of civilization. As we further develop technology and invest in better ways to do and create things, productivity increases. And because of that, we imagine that things get cheaper to make. And if there's a competitive market and producers are trying to compete against each other to provide the best prices to consumers, then it would be natural to see prices decrease. Because it's easier to create stuff, you should actually be paying less for the items you get every year. And in some, very quickly growing industries like electronics, we can actually see this, that despite increases in the money supply and inflationary tendencies at the monetary base, there are such strong gains in productivity for computers, for example. The price of computers continues to go down and the quality of computers goes up. And what we're seeing in that industry is a very exaggerated effect of what we would see in just every sort of industry. So the example I use in the article is like a toothbrush. In the past 50 years, we've gotten better at making toothbrushes. Certainly, we've gotten better at shipping them and producing them, but the price of them has gone up. And so we can tell that there's something mismatched there. And so under a Bitcoin standard, there would presumably be a mapping of productivity to prices, because we now have this constant form of communicating with each other. And so we would be able to feel the effects of increased productivity because our money would go further. The second one is employment and wages. And I think this is another one that people love to trot out, which is, oh my God, deflationary economy, you're going to see prices going down, and therefore workers' wages will be going down, and people are going to get smaller and smaller paychecks, and there's going to be riots in the street. And I think there's two big problems with this. The first is that wages do not follow prices, because wages is the price of human time. And human time is an incredibly malleable, creative, really impossible to reproduce substance. We're talking about artificial intelligence now, but even the very best artificial intelligence is still extremely narrow. And it's still just, true false functions that are able to, really get good at doing a very, very specific task. And, even the top people in the AI fields are like general intelligence. What a human can do is incredibly distant, and we don't even know if it's even possible. So because of that, human intelligence, human productivity, human time is going to be something that you can't just suddenly make better. You can't just like pump it out of a factory in a more productive fashion. You might be able to automate some things, but the same arguments that people had when they said, well, computers are going to make all these people obsolete. We have more jobs than ever. And so I don't think it's true that we can assume that wages will decrease with productivity gains. And if anything, we'll find new and better creative jobs that you and I can't even imagine right now. Mm-hmm. And historically, we can see that's true. While in the 1800s in America, we had this massive decrease in prices because we were more productive. And we were sort of on this, sound monetary standard for communicating prices. We saw wages double. And that's also despite the fact that, the labor supply was just like multiplying off the charts because so many people were immigrating to America. So I think that's totally natural. And the other thing is right now we're seeing this phenomena of sticky wages, which is that productivity will increase, but because the money supply is sort of increasing as well and your money is losing value, that wages will lag behind productivity. And people believe that this is a concept called sticky wages, which is that wages don't naturally adjust in the same way because, there's different theories about why. Maybe it's hard to ask for a raise. It's hard to, negotiate with your boss. And it's not a perfect market where you're just buying and selling your time. It's these like sort of like social agreements that are sticky. And if that's true, which we have every reason to believe it is right now, then we would see a similar but opposite trend where you would have sticky wages where wages stay high despite prices going down. So even if there was pressure on prices in a downward direction, then you could imagine that sticky wages, that phenomenon would happen where it would be really hard for a boss to cut its employee's salary. in the same way it's hard for an employee to ask for a raise because it's a messy subject, and people would sort of lag. People's wages would lag higher than other prices or something like that, and so it would actually lead to people being happier with their wages. So yeah, that's the general argument there. And then the last thing is, you know, even if there is a small decline in wages over a period of decades, like you're still seeing massive increases in purchasing power. So the amount of stuff, the how far your money goes, that's still increasing significantly. And I think that is much more important for workers' rights. And I think that treating them as if they're, very simple-minded people that aren't able to understand this is really silly and paternalistic, and we should just go to whatever is going to be the best mechanism for communicating prices and allowing people to have a safe place to store their time and energy.
Yeah, I mean, it's the arrogance of thinking like even that you could assess. I mean, not you. I mean, but people that try to control, prices and influence the money supply, interest rates, whatever, to maintain a certain amount of inflation or deflation or whatever. Yeah. Like the market will figure it out. If you have a monetary measuring stick that is market driven, a la something like Bitcoin, that's sound, a sound measuring stick, then productivity gains will mean lower prices, right? And maybe whatever happens with wages, it's what should happen. Maybe you only end up working 10 hours a week and your wage stays the same, and you get the benefit of the increased productivity of what's going on. I mean, like, why is everybody so worried about this? If you just let the market figure it out, it will come up with the best solution. And just think about the productivity gains that have been withheld from everybody by the manipulation of the money, right? By trying to keep in this narrow band of 2% inflation. Like, so that means that if productivity is such that it brought prices down dramatically, that 2% inflation target is actually saying, no, we don't want prices to go down too far. We don't want people to be able to benefit from the productivity gain. We want to keep it in a very narrow band of benefit, so yeah, how much over the last 50 years plus have the world, let's say, people's lives been robbed of the productivity and wealth gains because of the way that the monetary system is managed. I mean, it's crazy. And it's also crazy to think that despite all the technological advances and the productivity gains that have come through them, that we still have price increases. Like, pricing around the, everything today is going up pretty darn dramatically. Like from year to year, you can really tell the prices of most things are going up. And to imagine that that's happening with all the technological breakthroughs and efficiencies that are making so many of our the things we need in our day-to-day lives easier to produce, that we're still experiencing price gains, just shows you how like insane the manipulation and how detrimental the manipulation in the monetary system is.
Oh, 1,000,000%. Because you can imagine that if the productivity gains are significant, and you could something like Amazon, like completely changing the way supply chains operate. Let's say that the real price, like if we had a constant monetary channel to communicate, it wasn't being distorted, and we saw prices drop 5% because of that productivity gain, then an inflation rate of 2% is really saying, well, we're missing out on 7% of price changes. And so that the 2% inflation number is really insidious, because you're assuming that productivity stays constant, where really if it's dipping lower, then you're even, not only are you adjusting so much that it's even, but you're adjusting even higher than that. Who knows what the real inflation rate is? It could be 8, 10, 12% every year, just factoring out the productivity gains.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think how long this fiat money experiment could have persisted in an environment where perhaps innovation and productivity gains weren't as rapid as they are today, because the felt experience of price increases would have been much more, right? The productivity gains that we're seeing today through technology around the world is actually, making the negative influence of fiat money less obvious. Even though now it's reaching a breaking point. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely is offsetting it. And kind of serves to cover it up a little bit longer because you can kind of wave the magic wand a little bit and say, see, prices stay the same. And just the notion, and this is like, one of the Federal Reserve's key mandates is that we need to ensure price stability and maximum employment. But the idea that prices should be stable is just bananas. There's no reason to think that prices being stable helps anyone aside from the people who are printing money.
Man, it really makes you think, like, what kind of a world would we have if people weren't manipulating the money? If the money was a purely free market sound money, and that it
Yeah.
could do its own thing dependent on market forces, like what, how much abundance would there be? What kind of a world would we have? Because the more you think about this stuff, the more it becomes clear how much productivity and by extension, quality of life has been
Yeah.
suppressed as a result of how the monetary system is managed.
Man, we'd be in a flying cars right now, just zooming past each other. I mean, it's hard, it's crazy to imagine because these are exponential gains we're talking about, and um, I don't know, it's in so many aspects of life. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine what are I was actually just listening to this podcast called Strong Towns. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
But I randomly heard of it on Bitcoin Twitter, and so it's this guy who's talking about infrastructure, and he's a civil engineer, and talking about how Keynesian economics and this sort of like centralized top-down planning that we see in our financial systems is also that same mentality spills over to how we plan infrastructure projects. And instead of having organic growth in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our roads, and our streets, we do, a multi-billion-dollar project that we're convinced is going to be super efficient and basically finance it with massive amounts of debt. And we believe that just, the build, build, build mentality is going to lead to, these massive gains in the future because we're investing big amounts in our infrastructure. And he talks about the fragility that sort of thinking creates because, just like manipulating prices, when that Keynesian logic is applied to, we need to build roads to stimulate growth, to attract new, businesses here, et cetera, it leads to a fragility because you can't predict the future in any situation. And that includes when you're building infrastructure in your cities and your towns. And so many towns across middle America are just broke now, just absolutely bankrupt and getting worse by the day. You have, you call the police and your response time is measured in hours instead of minutes. And it's just heart wrenching, really, because of the arrogance of people thinking they can fully predict the future, 20, 30, 40 years out, and that this is a sustainable path to investment. And, it is hard to imagine what it would be like if our towns and our cities and our communities could grow organically in this sort of anti-fragile way, so that we aren't, basically debt financing all of our future improvements that end up being roads that no one even uses, or are jam-packed at 9 o'clock and then empty it in the middle of the night, and all of that really didn't go anywhere. So
Yeah.
it's hard to imagine.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking about efficiency and productivity gains and all this kind of stuff, I mean, also consider how much inefficiency and how much wastefulness has occurred as a result of central planning in all of its manifestations. I'm not just talking about, socialist governments and examples of that through history, but just
Yeah.
like you were just talking about central planning in all of its forms on the local level all the way up to the national and international level, where it's people making decisions and assumptions and then deploying
Yeah.
resources based on that rather than having kind of an even playing field for the market to dictate where resources should flow and how they should. And again, with Bitcoin, it seems like it's opening up this field of play where
Yeah.
instead of it being dictated from on high anymore, where it's going to allow for, it's this thing that nobody controls, and it's creating a market where the incentives are uh, what's the right word? The incentives are, let's just say, better, for lack of a better word right
Yeah.
now, that allow for these market forces and market dynamics to more unobstructedly dictate how things should be, where value should flow, and what should emerge from that.
Totally. And that was, I think, one of the big moments in my understanding of Bitcoin was I mean, and it sounds so simple, but no one understands how powerful pricing mechanisms are. Because a price communicates to every single person in the supply chain. It doesn't matter what's happening. I don't have to know that it was actually this fire in the rainforest that causes changes in the production of lumber, that changes how expensive this chair is, that changes. I mean, it just sends ripple effects. And so prices
It's so cool.
are just incredibly dynamic. And it's essentially like a neural network without computers, where you can signal to other people and have it, take in the intelligence, the collective intelligence of every single person involved. And as soon as that fire happens in the rainforest, then the prices shift across the globe. And suddenly other people are incentivized. Well, okay, wait a second. Now lumber is more expensive. So that means I could profit off the lumber that I have, or I could start planting trees and they're going to be valuable even if it's in 50 years or something like that. This is all still able to be functioned or priced in through these mechanisms. And it's just so unbelievably beautiful. And I think recognizing this collective intelligence that is an emergent property, rather than believing in the wisdom of a few people, and just understanding no matter how smart the FOMC is, no matter how brilliant the central bankers are, even the smartest people in the entire world wouldn't be able to match the collective intelligence of billions of minds and billions of people in their incredibly localized environments, making their own decisions and sort of pulling on that network and tugging at the different strings to allocate resources.
Yeah. It makes me think, I heard Jim Rickards speaking recently, and he's another, gold dude who's not into Bitcoin, and he has a very obvious sort of air of arrogance about him. But what he did say that I think is relevant to the point you were just making is, they ran some study where you remember when you were a kid and they had like a jar full of jelly beans. Whoever guessed how many was inside would get the jelly beans.
Yeah.
And the experiment was something like you could get like someone with a pen, like spending 10 hours just counting all the ones you could see and then inferring how many would be behind that and coming up with a prediction of how many jelly beans were in there. Or you could ask 1,000 people to guess. And the kind of emergent wisdom of the crowd of the 1,000 people guessing and then taking, like the median or the average of that or something would be more closely accurate than the person who like tried to look at each one. Now I know that's not a perfect, it's not a perfect example, but to your point about all the various inputs about pricing and the thousands of or more of inputs, it's like you said, it's so beautiful. And then to have some filter on that's distorting it is just to me it's the craziest thing in the world. And of course, like, price touches everything. And money touches price, right? So and I know, people in the Bitcoin community, have been talking about this sort of phenomenon. I know in Safe's book, he kind of made reference to, I think back in the Renaissance era or under a gold standard, where the work that emerges from a society that's predicated on more sound money is more quality. And it really makes sense when you look at it through that way, when you know that everything that's produced in an economy has a price, and every single price is related to the money that's used. So how would this wall that's behind me be different if it was predicated on a money that was not manipulatable or not manipulated? Like maybe it would have a more of a wood content. Maybe it would have less of this. Maybe it would be higher quality in that way. And
the quality is a really interesting concept because, I feel like that's another form of inflation that is much, it's not as talked about as much. I think the easier way to handle inflation is not to raise your prices, but just to decrease the quality of the goods that you get. Like, I use an electric razor, and I have one from like 6 years ago, and it still is better than anything I can purchase in the store. And I can't even like the newest models of the exact same razor, the new ones are just shit.
Right.
And they're the same price or maybe even a little bit higher than the one I bought 6 years ago. And I keep looking for a new razor and I can't find it. And it is infuriating because I just have to keep going back to the shitty one. That's even like half broken and still works better than anything I can get in the store today. And I just, I feel like this is a big reason for so much um, stress and anxiety and frustration in politics is that so many people just feel like they're just getting ripped off all the time. And it's so easy for a politician like Bernie or Elizabeth Warren point the finger at, oh, well, it must be the thing that you're immediately receiving the goods from. It must be Walmart or it must be the razor company that is doing this because they're the ones that are choosing to raise prices, and that first step, like, if you, that's a very, very tempting way to convince people because most people don't have an understanding of how prices work. And that naive take on economics of, oh, it's the evil razor company that's doing that. Not to mention they're doing it because, their margins are razor thin and they're just trying to get something on the table.
Pardon the pun.
Man, it's so frustrating because, and Trump's no better, of course. He's saying it's the immigrants and China and that, it's everything but the fact that we're, establishing these massive parasitic organizations in our society and we're hoping that nothing happens.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's frustrating, and I'm hoping Bitcoin kind of pulls the wool back from these people's eyes a little bit, and maybe it will in the long run. It's tough to know because it's so tempting to just take the easy road out. It's so tempting.
It gives me, and I agree, and I see all this crazy shit that like Bernie puts out on Twitter and stuff, and you know, I can't accept that he doesn't know better. So I feel like
Yeah.
this is just politics for him. He's preaching to the choir. He knows this is what's gonna get him support, and I just want to smack him in the face for being such a piece of shit about that. But because like I actually tweeted to him today, but like pick up a history book. We know how this sort of pandering ends. We know how things devolve when you say, hey, those rich people need to be paying more, and we, like us big group of poor people, we need more money and we need to pay for more stuff, so we should take it from them. Like, it's not new. This has happened many times throughout the course of history. We know how it ends, and what they're conjuring up is just not helpful. Like, I know it's going to be hard either way you slice it, like you said earlier, but approaching it in this way is not helpful. The other one that kills me is the minimum wage, where people talk about,
Oh man.
we need to give people a living wage, and we need to increase it to $15 an hour or $20 an hour. And it's like, why not make it $100 an hour while we're just pulling things out of thin air?
Yeah.
Why don't we make $1,000 an hour? Like, let's just do that. Then everybody's rich, right? Like,
Yeah. No, it's such basic economics, but it's so obvious why it's politically profitable.
Yeah.
It's so obvious, and it hurts. It is. I found myself just getting really stressed out. Like, the more I thought about this stuff, it's just not healthy to even look at it because it's so naive and it's so enticing, and I think that obviously Bernie loves to play on this sort of fixed pie mentality. Like, I mean, it's just fundamental misunderstanding of wealth as a generative process, and that Bill Gates can be rich and everyone else can be richer at the same time, and that productivity increases is just a concept that is foreign to these people. And so they advocate policies of like, let's draw blood out of one arm and inject it into the other arm and spill some blood on the floor and everything's better instead of just, going and working out and making ourselves stronger.
Yeah.
And man, it's frustrating.
One of the things that does give me hope, though, because I think you've said that you got into Bitcoin in early 2018, something like that.
That's right. Yeah, it was mid 2018.
Yeah, so that's not a fucking long time ago, man. And
No.
and now you're deep down the rabbit hole, and you're contributing content, and you're having these conversations. So, like, people can be, red pilled. People can change. Now, I know we're dealing with a lot of people that need to have, their mindset turned around, and very easy for us to say it from our positions of comfort, right? Our positions of relative comfort. There's a lot of people in society, obviously, that for various reasons, in some cases themselves to blame, in other cases circumstance to blame, but that, are in far more desperate circumstances than us. And as a result, they're going to probably latch on to the thing that seems most likely to get them out of that situation as soon as fucking possible, right? So I sympathize with them on some level, because I just can't, I know I can't fully appreciate the kind of the anxiety and the stress and the difficulty of their situation.
Yeah.
But
And yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, but as much as I sympathize and, all that, it doesn't mean that the answer is different. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that, you're right just because you want it or need it more than me. Like, I want it and need it too, but, maybe there's less pressure on me, but unfortunately that doesn't mean the answer is different. That the medicine is going to be a tough pill to swallow either way.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to what we were saying earlier. It's just like these promises have been made, and we know mathematically they cannot be kept. And there is not nearly enough billionaires you can cut in half and redistribute
Right.
to make even 10% of that viable. I mean, it is just unbelievable amounts of promises that are going to have to be broken. And all we can hope for is kind of build the future of what is going to give people a fair way to store and communicate their wealth outside of the system. But I do think, it is very frustrating trying to talk to people. And so many people, I don't blame them for it, but it is really hard. There is a small group of people, I think you and me are in that group of people who are willing to say, okay, this is an interesting idea. It sounds a little bit too good to be true, but I'm just going to assess its logical properties and just follow the arguments where they go. And people like that are very rare and are what's necessary to start something like this. And I can't imagine being a Bitcoiner in 2012 when there's no quality content. There's only forum posts on Bitcoin Talk, and you're still trying to parse these arguments out. And you're like, wait a second, this could actually work. And so I think that as the space progresses and the quality of content and just podcasts like this, as they become more accessible and the messages improve and the arguments improve, hopefully we can change more minds. But it's really tough to get someone to just open their mind in the first place. And it's not because they're dumb or because they're inferior. It's just because most people do not have the time to, they adopt a sort of closed mind mentality because there's every person in the world trying to change your mind about everything at all times.
Right.
And you just can't be open to it all the time. If I tried to go and disprove every conspiracy theory that's being peddled to me, I would go crazy and I would have zero time to do anything I enjoy. So it is very lucky that we are open-minded enough to appreciate Bitcoin and follow its logical premises. Mm-hmm. But, I think that also brings a bunch of crazy people into Bitcoin, and it has a whole bunch of effects. But ultimately, I think Bitcoin will be something that people choose out of necessity in a more tragic sense than, oh, this is really exciting. Let's just look at this fun new thing that has all these great properties. Yeah.
Yeah. What is the atmosphere like? Because you hear a lot about what's going on college campuses and stuff in the U.S. in terms of specifically with socialism and the social justice stuff. What's your experience been like with that kind of stuff?
Oh, well, I'm at Stanford. I am at one of the greatest institutions in terms of its reputation, and they're all socialist. I'm joking in a way, but at the same time, I'm not. And it's sad. I'm taking a politics class right now, and at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, which is your classic business school. These are people who've been in finance for a couple of years and then chose to come and party and get some nice padding for their resume. And you'd think, these are people that understand dollars and cents, and they understand the importance of markets and economic calculation and distributing resources. And I would say, it's like 70 to 80% of people are advocating either outright socialism or, sort of Elizabeth Warren style. We need corporations that are not based on profits, but corporations that are based on a variety of societal goals, such as, what they're doing for their neighborhood and the environment on a global and local scale, and community service building and all that stuff. And that's how we measure success of a corporation. I mean, these are just crazy ideas that you would expect at a business school of all places
Right.
to appreciate, especially something like Stanford. And it's just right over their head. It's so frustrating. And I think it is really a bizarre moment in the sense that politics has taken this very strong ethical turn. So it's not just that you have to, especially on college campuses, it's not just that most people are, democratic socialists, but it's that it's a presumption on every interaction. And I think even if it's 30% of people are more, not conservative, but just pro free market. I really see it as like you're either pro markets or anti markets. The social side of it, of whether or not you're conservative or liberal, like I see that as a separate thing. But just in terms of economics, maybe 30% of people appreciate markets, but it feels like it's 0% because no one even has the courage to speak about it, because you just get ripped apart by people just saying that you are. I mean, just the other day, I was one of 3 people in a class of 60 to defend Milton Friedman, saying it's important to calculate corporate profits instead of any other thing, because that's how you allocate resources effectively. And man, I just got ripped apart in the court of public opinion for defending just basic market movements. And I was told that it was because I was sexist and my gender was bleeding
Fuck.
through my understanding of economics. And like it sounds like it's almost hard to believe until you're in it and you're like, holy shit, this is like actually how these people think. And it's just bizarre. And professors not only allow it, but they like encourage it. And I think that's probably why they're professors instead of actual productive members of society. But
Do these
yeah,
people put up like a cogent, rational argument when they're refuting whatever you're saying?
well, it's actually really funny because I made this argument defending Milton, and they said, well, actually, if you look at companies that pursue societal goals, it's best for shareholder value. And I'm like, and so it's a good thing they're doing this. And I'm like, you're measuring whether or not this is a good idea because it's maximizing shareholder value, which is my whole point. Is the only way you can measure this is through shareholder value. So like you can't like it's so strange because the entire argument that they're going against of why we shouldn't be calculating profits this way is how they're justifying what they're saying is a good idea, but they can't see the contradiction. And I get it. I get that you want to help people. I really do.
Yeah.
And it's so compelling to just virtue signal and talk about how you want to help your community and your neighborhoods and stuff like that. But just the realization that markets and prices are the best way to do that is a really hard pill to swallow. And I think in this political climate, the stigma associated with just speaking positively about markets is really hard. And I think that also comes down to there's like a semantic shift of the word capitalism is associated with the market dynamics that we have in the United States and elsewhere. Whereas this is not capitalism at all. This is crony capitalism at best and really corporate socialism. And that's really hard for people to understand because the word capitalism is associated with what is happening right now. And I think if we didn't have a monetary base that could just be printed and given to whoever stands up and lobbies in Congress, then we could start to see a true free market emerge instead of, privatize the gains and socialize the losses and call that capitalism. It's not capitalism in any true sense of the term.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's something that I say on Twitter all the time. I try to stress in conversations I have where everyone's running in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
They're running towards. They think they're running away from capitalism and towards socialism. They think that's better.
Yeah.
They need to be running more towards capitalism because, like you said, we have
Right.
crony capitalism or social corporatism or whatever the term you
Yeah.
use, but we
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
have. And the crazy part is like what we're promoting here is just free markets. It's got
Yeah.
freedom in the fucking name. Like, isn't
Yeah.
that what we all want? Don't we want to maximize and optimize for freedom? Because what does that mean? It means that people get to freely choose what their inputs, what their behavior is, and then the results of that are what they should be. Like the less manipulation, the better. It's got free in the name, but people have been so brainwashed to see, even if you capitalism mainly, but even you say free market capitalism to someone, and they think it's evil somehow, and
Oh,
this
totally.
this idea of compassion has, this is if you it's almost like today if you're compassionate, you can be violent against someone else. I mean, this is kind of what Antifa and that kind of stuff in the U.S. is about. It's like, well, our compassion for the people that we perceive to be oppressed is justification for being violent against the people we believe are responsible for it. Which is, I mean, it's madness and it's really scary, but that seems to be what's going on.
Yeah, the rhetorical capture of the word capitalism to describe the status quo um, is just so goddamn powerful because now anytime you go back and read someone like Milton Friedman and he talks about capitalism, then you associate what's happening in the political capture of the United States with the same word that's used to describe something completely different because it has two different meanings when Bernie uses it and when Milton uses it. And that's just, it's genius and it's terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a tricky turn of language that it makes me feel like it's going to be very hard to reverse it because even academics, like even the people that are supposedly the people who understand this stuff in business schools at Stanford aren't saying what capitalism is. And
That's why I'm
I don't
saying, man,
know.
we
Yeah.
those of us who think and feel the way we do, and I think we've got to voice these things,
Yeah.
podcasts, videos, books,
Yeah.
articles, all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. We've got to at least rep the other side of this argument because there's certainly a lot of noise on the other on the side that we're against, and it's our side is more nuanced, it's more complicated, it requires perhaps more
Yeah.
education and more time and all that kind of stuff, and that's working against us, but that's our lot.
Yeah, and I am confident that Bitcoin will save many people, but it certainly won't save everyone. And I think that there is a small group of people that have an open mind that will somehow find their way to Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is, I think, good at picking people out and resonating with certain types, and at least Bitcoin is something that is known by pretty much everyone, understood by very few. But I think that the people that are some of the brightest and most powerful thinkers that are willing to not accept sort of official narratives that are fed to them, it will find them. And I think that sort of that in itself is incredibly powerful because you're cherry picking just the best and brightest people in the world to kind of be the initial torchbearers of this new revolution in economic and societal formation, and that is crazy. When I listen to Bitcoin podcasts and the people that I meet, like yourself and many others, like you can just tell that they're thinking much, much larger than whoever is propped up. Like I go to, I'm in Silicon Valley. There's all these speakers at Stanford who come and, they're the lauded professionals of the venture capital space or whatever it might be. And they're idiots. They're all idiots. They don't understand what they're talking about. They got lucky cashing in on Airbnb, and they don't understand, like, they're doing the same shit. They're venture capitalists, and they're like, guys, we need to rethink capitalism. It's really not working out. And I'm like, your job is literally to defend the thing that is creating untold amounts of value for people, and you don't even know what it is. And then I listened to a Bitcoin podcast with some random dude who's, I don't even know. Like a lot of Bitcoiners, we're not in positions of power. We're not in any sort of, esteemed positions, but they're so ridiculously smart.
Yeah.
I mean, just blows me away. And it makes me super bullish.
I was just going to say, it's one of the things that gives, like, it's one of the most bullish indicators for me. It's like whether it's Twitter or on the podcast or whatever, interact with these people, and I'm like, man, like, I know there's confirmation bias and all the rest of it, but still, like, it really seems objectively like these people are just, clear thinking, rational minded, yes, passionate, yes, enthusiastic, but just like, these are the people that I want to learn from. Like, it just feels so right. And that's why, occasionally I say too, like, some people say, oh, there's no Bitcoin community. I'm like, no, fuck that. There's definitely a Bitcoin community, and it's a dispersed, like-minded, doesn't mean we're all the same, but I totally agree. Like, I'm always blown away by the quality of people that I encounter in this space.
Yeah, it is ridiculous, and so passionate. Like, I published the deflation piece, and of course, my mentions start blowing up with people saying like, "Oh, that's not what deflation is. Deflation is a decrease in prices."
Right.
And I had to mute my notifications because there were like 4 different Bitcoiners just like latched onto this and just kept arguing back and forth and just like valiantly defending my definition of deflation. And like it was so like heartwarming to see how toxic, but it's not even toxic, it's just like adamant these people are, and they care so much. And that sort of like feeling just can't be replicated, and is what makes Bitcoin so powerful. It reminds me of just thinking about open source software and how the reason open source applications can just beat closed source is because the people who are working on it are working on it for free. In other words, they really truly care about using the software correctly, and making good product instead of just like clocking out their time. And Bitcoiners, we're not getting paid to sit on Bitcoin Twitter and argue with each other. I mean, we're ignoring our families. We're not doing the things we want to do, right?
Yeah.
But we're doing it because we really, really care about getting this right, about getting these arguments right, about creating these narratives, about just coming to a collective understanding of what this weird thing is that just kind of fell into our lap. And that is a form of knowledge creation that is better than any classroom in the country, in the world, because it is truly voluntary, and you're not restrained by, and you're also not, I think the fact that it's private and the fact that there's a lot of people that are anonymous and they can say whatever they want massively benefits that conversation as well, because you're not judged by anything other than the force of your arguments.
Totally.
And that's also just mind-blowing how powerful that can be.
And it's all in real time, and it's nonstop, 24 hours a day, every time zone. It's like, it's crazy. I was thinking about it today about, kind of how the revolutionaries used to kind of hang out in the cafes and the coffee shops in France or wherever, and kind of like exchange ideas and then hatch their plans and whatever, they ended up doing. Bitcoin is our revolutionary cafe. Like, it's where all of these like-minded people are getting together and just like smashing ideas together, trying to learn from each other, as you said, supporting each other, because we know, and it's for a cause. Like, we don't know like the precise cause yet. Like, we know what we want to change the monetary standard. We want Bitcoin, but I don't
Yeah.
think we know the full picture yet, but we all know that this, we want to be on this ship together, and we want to be. One of my favorite little gifs is the one from the movie 300.
Yeah.
The one where it's like he
Where he
points.
walks through and he's like,
No, he point.
I,
Yeah, that one's good too. Is that from 300, or that's from
I
the
don't know.
second one maybe?
I think it.
I remember that
Okay.
one, like when the price was pumping, like it was
Yeah.
six,
So
seven,
funny.
eight. The one I'm talking about is he's talking to the Athenians like before a fight, right? He's like, "Hey, you, what do you do?" He's like, "I'm a farmer," and it's like, "What do you do?" It's like, "I'm a sheep herder or whatever." And what about you? It's like, "I'm a whatever," because the Athenians are like, "We have 10,000 more soldiers than you."
Oh
And
yeah.
then he goes to his 300 and he goes like, "What are you guys?" And they're just like, "Huddle, huddle." And
Oh,
I fucking love that shit.
it's so true. I'm a Bitcoiner first and everything else second
Yeah.
at this point. Because it creates a form of community and man, it is unlike any other group I've been a part of. And it also just speaks to how inadequate our academic institutions are. This is the biggest shift in economic, political, sociological, historical thought, um, and none of them know anything about it. It's not on their radar. It's not like even at Stanford, the tech haven, the place that's supposed to know it all, like the cryptocurrency class. I showed up to it, and it started with the professor pulling up coin market cap and going, well, there's Bitcoin and there's Lightspeed and there's Ethereum. And I'm
Okay.
like, oh shit. And so I ended up teaching the course because I talked to the professor afterwards and I was like, you know, let's we should, we should really talk about how these things work. And I think I have a better understanding of you do. And I was, super nice to him, and
Right.
he totally admitted that he just kind of fell into teaching this and didn't really know what he was talking about. So, we had a really good time reading some of Stop into Crypt's articles about how the network works, what a node is, how the transactions are processed. So we had Saifedean's Bitcoin Standard for our reading. But, you know, these people are I mean, it also has major implications for law, which is what I'm studying.
Mm-hmm.
There is no good academic understanding of it. And I think it's for a couple reasons. I think it's because it challenges academic assumptions. And, as much as we think that academics are the people who are on top of their stuff, they're really just tenured and like to say the same thing over and over and over again,
Yeah.
regardless of whether or not they're right or wrong. And they're also, it's really bizarre because when I think about what I know, and I'm sure you're the same way, when you think about the things you know and you've learned, you don't think about it in discrete categories. You think about them as your collective understanding of the world, and that encompasses a variety of different subjects, and that allows you to appreciate different events in history or different changes such as Bitcoin. Well, academic institutions are siloed like echo chambers where you only speak to other people in your own silo. All of your work is reviewed by people in your own silo. And especially for social sciences, I can understand this more for the hard sciences. Like, maybe chemistry is only related to chemistry, and we don't care if the quantum physicist peer reviews it. But it seems very important for the legal, historical, sociological, and economic fields to talk to each other and to collaborate and to come up with collective models for understanding the world instead of, all right, here's the best model we could come up with in each of our separate siloed categories. And we're not really even, and philosophy is the biggest one for me, and keeping all these things separate and take the insights of one and not patching it over to the other. I think that's the really beautiful thing about the Austrian school is you can tell that Mises and Hayek were deep historical and philosophical thinkers, and that Mises in Human Action has this, the first couple of chapters. I'm a philosopher. I studied philosophy in college, and I immediately was just shocked at how deep his philosophical foundation was for the way he articulates how humans interrelate, and that is something that's not in any sort of traditional classical economics. This like understanding of human subjectivity, and that's a deep philosophical insight and something that forms his entire understanding of voluntary subjective interactions and subjective theory of value and all of those things. You need the philosophy to understand it, and having this hierarchy, top down, centralized, siloed, echo chamber approach to knowledge is just going to leave you with stagnation. And I'm glad they don't even notice Bitcoin, because it just shows how painfully inadequate they are for telling us anything about what the world should be like.
Yeah. And it also shows you how much ego, and whether that's expressed in arrogance or whether it's
Yeah.
expressed in insecurity, both manifestations, how much it can blind you to things, right? So for a lot of the people you just mentioned, their knowledge of whatever, they're teaching, for example, that's a comfort. And that comfort, is not only part of their personality, it's not only in, their income, but it makes them feel like they have a grip on things, and we're all
Yeah.
insecure in some capacity, and we all kind of yearn for that comfort and that confidence in who we are and what we're doing. And what I, again, what I love about, most people that interact on Bitcoin and Bitcoin Twitter and stuff is like, none of us are perfect, obviously, and we all have our, our quirks, and we like to get in, fights and whatever it is.
Yeah,
But
totally.
we have our ego in check enough, or at least we recognize the value of staying humble enough to have an open aperture to learn, right? So that in whatever angle it's coming from, the philosophical, the scientific, the historical, whatever, like we're going to let it in, because our desire to understand this thing trumps our desire for egotistical comfort or recognition or confidence or anything like that.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. And that's something that I think is definitely a virtue. I don't know if this is where it came from, but I think we can see something really similar in just the open source community in general, in that the people um, that are in charge of maintaining a repository or something like that, you want to have people that are deciding about something, if it's merged or not. You want them to be very humble and in their approach. You want them to be very talented, certainly, but you want them to be humble and not completely just driven by what they think is right, because otherwise the entire open source model breaks down, because you're not adding new ideas. If someone is arrogant, then they would say, oh, you made this thing that improves my software, but I'm not going to merge it because it's not what I made. And I can't handle admitting the fact that my software wasn't perfect. And it is this really interesting interplay between, clearly the only reason that people maintain these repositories is because they like the validation of doing something good for the community and getting that sort of ego boost in a way. But at the same time, they have to be very humble enough to accept the fact that their ideas could be flawed and that needs to be updated in some better way. And I think we see that a lot from community members in Bitcoin, which is the only reason people are on Bitcoin Twitter is so they can get validation and other people can hear their message. But at the same time, they're super open to criticism and arguing and changing their minds. I've seen so many times on Bitcoin Twitter, someone gets in a really long argument and they're like, oh, good point. That was actually, I hadn't thought about it like that. And that's very interesting. I had, just not considered it. And that's so powerful
It
and
is.
just completely absent from any modern political
I
discussions
know.
or
I was just gonna
academic
say, isn't it
discussions.
crazy how rare that is? Like you don't often hear like two people have a heated debate and then one side go, "Oh yeah, no, that's a good point. I didn't consider that." yeah, okay, I'll integrate that into my way of
Yeah,
thinking now.
it is crazy to even it's so funny that just the concept of like a Republican and Democrat sitting across the table from each other and having a reasoned discussion in a coffee shop. I mean, that is like a laughable idea.
Yeah.
The concept that people with disagreeing ideas in a world where politics has become ethics is just impossible, truly impossible, in a way that it doesn't seem like it should be. And it seems like we just say, well, I think this is the best way to provide healthcare. Oh, I think this is the best way to provide healthcare. Oh, let's sort of argue like what are the merits of it, giving healthcare in this way or that. And it seems pretty straightforward. You could have that argument, but increasingly those sorts of discussions just cannot happen. And it was funny last night. Ben Shapiro was on campus, and he's kind of the conservative firebrand type. And there was this massive protest outside of all these people, um, just saying that he shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be allowed to speak. It was just so offensive to them that he was even allowed to set foot on campus. And then he spends his entire time talking. I wasn't at the actual thing, but I read some of the things he said this morning. And the whole time he's shitting on the alt-right and talking about, that the Republican Party has been infiltrated by white nationalists and they're despicable and we should throw them out and we shouldn't interact with them and all this stuff. And it's like, it's not even that he's saying things that are offensive. He's actually saying that racism, like he spent the whole time saying racism is bad, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's toxic to formulating smart, effective policies. And he still is just like, just everyone just sits around protesting even his appearance, his ability to even voice these ideas, instead of just listening to them and arguing against them and having a debate.
Well, that's the madness, and it's crazy how many people today are, and I think I heard this term first from Peterson, but I mean, it's probably been said many times,
Yeah.
but being ideologically possessed seems like a very real thing, right? It takes over your own rational appraisal, decision making,
Yeah.
reasoning, all that kind of stuff, and you just default to whatever the ideology, as far as you understand it, would say. I saw another one recently. I think it was Dave Rubin. He was
Yeah.
doing a talk somewhere, and these people just got up and started chanting whatever, just trying to drown him out or whatever. And
Hmm.
he was literally like, "Okay, yep, okay, you got the floor. Like, what would you like to say? Would love to have a discussion with you. Nobody here is yelling at you. I'm not going to say anything mean. Just tell me, like, what's your point? Like, what? Let's have a discussion, for God's sakes. Let's have a discussion." And he did that for like 5 minutes, and they just kept doing their thing. And it's like, it must be so maddening to these people, because they're just like, look, I get it. You disagree with some of the things that I'm saying. Fine. Like, the only recourse we have here, the only recourse is going to lead to a better outcome than our current situation, is if we have a chat about it. Like, come on, let's sit down.
Totally.
Let's sit down at the table. But that, and I think this speaks to a much deeper thing, probably beyond the scope of our conversation here. But why do
Yeah.
people so easily become ideologically possessed? And I think it goes back to what I mentioned before, and just a profound underlying insecurity that probably everybody feels. And then
Hmm.
you patch that up through the associations you create and the things that you believe in and the ideologies that you attach yourself to and the people that support them and represent them, because it gives you a sense of comfort. Call it tribalism, call it whatever, but it just
Oh yeah.
it helps dissolve that insecurity and gives you some, at least a perception of certainty, and you're willing to uh, defend that pretty much at all costs. And it takes a very, enlightens the wrong word, but it's not the right word. It's not coming to me right now, but it takes that, and an individual who's comfortable with the being uncomfortable, because they
Yeah.
realize the importance of seeing things clearly, seeking, the greatest approximation of truth that they can, and then speaking that and having that being an ongoing process, not just one that you find a piece of truth or you find a piece of comfort and you stay there. It takes a very, and this again, this is why I love people in Bitcoin, but it takes
Yeah.
a very courageous person to
Yeah.
constantly be letting go of the things from which they derive comfort in order to come to a greater approximation of truth. And so many people just they don't have the courage to do that, and as a result, that insecurity manifests in so many detrimental behaviors, I would say.
Yes. I just was recently thinking about this because in college I really enjoyed Taoism and sort of that sort of, I'm not a religious person in any way, but I think that it's a very valuable way of approaching. It's sort of like a method for approaching the world versus like a set of truths.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's something very valuable in that approach of, you know, taking that sort of view that there isn't, like, the real world is messy. And the reason people love ideologies is because it tells you there's an objective truth. There's a real good and bad here. And here it's so simple. It's these people. They're the bad people. And these people, they're the good people. And the real world is much, much more complicated than that. And ideology is a way to avoid that messiness that can create a lot of mental discomfort. And I think that the Taoist approach of sort of like appreciating just the flows of society and ideas and, just being receptive to different forms of thought is really hard, but
Yeah.
super valuable and actually like very much related to Bitcoin's economic foundation. And the idea of the subjective theory of value is this very, very humble approach where you said, economists always want to say the real cost of something, the real value of something is its cost. The real value of something is the labor that's put into it. The Austrian view is these labels are impossible. These discrete definitions that we pretend to derive are impossible. And all we can really say is it's up to it's up to the eye of the beholder. And that is a brave thing. It's a difficult thing to admit your lack of knowledge. But ultimately, that's what you have to do, I think, to create a thriving voluntary society, because your only other recourse when you start to believe in truth, in objective, enforceable truth, is coercion and violence. And I think that that's always unacceptable as a way of organizing society. So it's a messy world that it does take courage. It takes patience. It takes humility, and all of those things are in record short supply right now. And it's probably because thinking about the sovereign individual and thinking about the message it's imparting, which is, there's moments in civilization where a ideology becomes so powerful that it starts to consume the productive elements of society, that the church could become so all-pervasive that it suddenly wants to regulate every single aspect of your lives. It wants to siphon away as much wealth as possible because this ideology has become so pervasive that eventually it crumbles under its own weight. And I think that, regardless of which side of the aisle you're looking at, there is an all-pervasive belief in the objective truth of we need a very big nation state to secure our future. And I think that we are coming to the end of that ideology, and I think that there is a lot of tension and just desperation as we feel that this is sort of crumbling under its own weight. And I think that it will be a very strange day when that ideology starts to melt away, because the reality of the situation is those promises are being broken. The belief that we just need more regulators is an impossible fantasy and counterproductive. All of that is hard to imagine, but eventually it will collide with reality. And, if it's 2 years from now, 2 months from now, 20 years from now, it's really, impossible to say. And anyone who does say they know, you should run the other way. But we know that can't go on forever. And I hope that Bitcoin will be a foundational text in the way that the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence was, in grounding a new understanding of human rights and humanity, and hopefully what the Constitution and Declaration did for understanding people have these sort of natural rights that are not granted to them by some higher power, but they're innate. Perhaps Bitcoin will do that in the sense that value is subjective, and your ability to store your time and energy should not be anything but your own. Mm-hmm. And I think that alone is just a tremendous boon to social welfare and human flourishing. So I'm optimistic.
I totally agree, and I took the words out of my mouth. I was just going to say I'm optimistic too, and a lot of it is made of this, and like we've been saying, it's still happening on a small scale, but we all I'm always amazed the people I speak to when they tell me how much they've changed as a person as a result of being in Bitcoin. And on the surface, it just sounds so absurd. It's like you bought some digital money and you became this way better version of yourself. Like, the fuck is that? But it's like almost a universal, not quite, but so many people I talk to. And if it can do that, then, that gives me hope, because what we're talking about, and what we were talking about, ego and insecurity and ideology and stuff, that's going to require some pretty fundamental changes in how you view yourself and the type of person that you want to try to be in the world. And it seems like this phenomenon, that this digital fire that we're all dancing around, is actually causing people to change in that kind of a way, in profound ways that, seemingly very few other things that they've encountered in their lives inspired them to change to that degree. So that gives me a tremendous amount of optimism and hope.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that in my own life, and it's really been miraculous. And I think that the shift from pessimism to optimism is huge, and allows a form of detachment as well, instead of arguing over the scraps and being a part of that and trying to figure out which side do I want to be for in this weird tug of war that I feel we're in. You can just kind of step back and say, oh, I don't have to be a part of this. And actually, that's just what's going to have to happen. And there's going to be the tug of war. But eventually, we're kind of beyond that tug of war. And that's really powerful. And I feel for me, Bitcoin has just changed so many parts of my life. I feel like just from my own personal health perspective, I care a lot more about my health. I just am in so much better shape. I never went to the gym or anything, and now I'm working out, maybe every day or at least 5 times a week.
Why is that? Do you know what inspired that change? Was it conscious? You're all these people on Bitcoin Twitter eating meat, and I got to do some shit here, or do you know when that switched and what caused it?
There is a it is so motivating to have sort of an optimistic viewpoint in life. It just makes you want to do stuff and do things with yourself. It wasn't even the meat eating stuff. I actually thought that was really crazy in the beginning, and now I wouldn't say I'm a carnivore, but I get my proteins, if you know what I mean. And but yeah, just there is something so uplifting and motivating, and I felt like I had to go work out. Or I had to go, not just go to the gym, but run the hill or go on the trails around campus and stuff like that. And it's weird. I can't really explain it, but there is something that when you're playing video game, I used to play video games all the time. My life before Bitcoin was, I'm in law school. I'm doing the least amount for maximum returns. That's kind of been my approach to all school, has just been like do the least amount possible to just like do well. And I think a lot of people just kill themselves and aren't very productive. And so I just, I'm here at law school and I just, study like an hour or something like that, or not even, and then just go back to playing video games or just being a potato basically, and just waiting for the next stage of my life. Oh, okay. In 3 years, I'm going to have a job. I'm just going to kick around until then and not really care. Not, like there is no motivation. And I think that's because it felt like in terms of broader societal history and movements that we kind of had reached this permanent plateau or malaise or stagnation. And I don't know what's going to happen, but it's just going to be more of the same, just bullshit things that are kind of fed to me through various communication platforms, and no one is thinking in a big way. And the people that are thinking big, supposedly, are really just, in this sort of eternal tug of war that doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. And everything just seems kind of fucked. And I don't really see a way out. And suddenly when Bitcoin is like, oh, there's this really new thing, and it could actually not just be a cool idea, which I think a lot of the gold bug types kind of paint them into this, unrealistic optimism. Like there's gold lost 100 years ago. I don't know why you're holding on to it, but it lost and it will lose again, and it will always lose because it's broken, because it's centralized by third parties.
Yeah.
You're going to lose. And, that seemed just sort of like fatalistic, like, I'm not interested in that. And suddenly I find Bitcoin and I'm like, wait a second, this is actually much bigger. This is, oh my God, I'm in the middle of a historical moment. And so suddenly I'm like interested in history. I didn't care about history. It felt like it didn't pertain to my life because we were kind of like post-historical. We were in this sort of like, nothing really changes anymore. It's every day more of the same. And recognizing myself in this like broader historical context, it's just crazy. It's hard to even, and I'm sure you felt the same thing. Like you can't even really put it into words, but it is just earth shattering. And
well, I think it
motivating.
It becomes this thing that is pulling you forward, and it's basically, the download that you're getting is now there's something available where the more fit you make yourself, the more benefit to be derived personally for you from this thing, and the more you can contribute to it, to it's in its fullness. Think of someone who's like, cripplingly depressed, right?
Yeah.
They don't have the motivation to go to the gym, to eat well, to, refine their, to educate themselves so that they're more employable, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff, because they have a deep feeling that no matter what, it's not going to make me happy. It's not going to give me satisfaction. So what's the point? And I think all of us, maybe we, not because of depression, but because of the landscape of the world that you just described, we felt that to some degree. We're like, what's the point really? And now some of that was just bullshit on our side, because we still live in a world where there's tons of opportunity. We can do lots of cool shit. But, on a macro scale, it's like, if you really think that things are pretty fucked up, then it takes the motivation away from you. And you're like, I might as well play video games. I might as well do this and just try to carve out a little bit of fun for myself. But once this new horizon opens up, that you start seeing like, wow, like there is something worthwhile to contribute to that's drawing me forward, that represents a horizon of almost infinite possibilities. Well, that's something to get out of the bed for. That's something to like, make myself as fucking fit as possible to go and chase. And by the way, all these other people that are chasing it with me, they're fit as fuck too. So I better, if I want to hang with that crew, I better get myself in shape. And I don't mean just like physically, but in all capacities.
Yeah. Yeah, like mental fitness, and just like I suddenly just was talking to different Bitcoiners and stuff and realized I have no understanding of history. Like, I technically sat through the classes, but I certainly didn't appreciate any of it. I didn't understand or want to remember it. And suddenly I'm like genuinely curious as to how things played out in the past because it gives me some sort of like lantern in whatever we're going through. And it is it is a really big I think you're definitely on the motivation point of getting yourself out of bed. Like what I was living before Bitcoin was a very individualistic focus on how to maximize my life or my returns or whatever, get a nice cushy job or whatever. I cared about that a lot. I cared about, going to a good school and things like that. But it was an extremely individual focus on I'm just going to maximize my own personal benefit and just, like call it hedonism or whatever it is, but it was very myopic in how I wanted to live my life. And now I can't stop thinking about how this will change society and what am I doing in this moment to, like let people know or help build the intellectual or whatever foundations for this shift and feeling like you're plugged into something much bigger than just like, how can I get the biggest paycheck possible?
Right.
How can I enjoy my life and experience as much pleasure as possible?
And
It's just so meaningful all of a sudden and addictive.
And I
Um,
think we
yeah,
all want this to succeed so much, for a variety of reasons. But we also, perhaps subconsciously, perhaps consciously, know that people are going to be looking at us as a proxy for the quality of this thing that we're promoting. Obviously, right? The medium
yeah,
is always the message to some degree, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
we're the medium for the message of Bitcoin. And we know that, like, if we're pieces of shit and we're talking about this great thing that we want people to get into, they're not going to, because we're going to be discrediting it by the vessel that's carrying the message, right? So I think at least to some degree we think like we gotta tighten up our shit and be the type of people that are worthy of representing something that we think has so much potential for positive change and benefit for both ourselves and everyone else. And if that's the case, then we're going to have to be a bit more excellent in many domains.
yeah. It's so weird because I think that's it's so true, and it's also unconscious because I don't I don't go to the gym thinking, oh, I got to be
Of
ripped so
course,
I
of
can
course.
represent. But at the same time, it definitely is part of like I want to be worthy of whatever this is. And if that means I'm going to stay in good shape, and I also use the like working out or, going for a run or whatever as just a way to learn more because it's such a great time to fully immerse your mind in a podcast. And that is just, it's helped me so much. I mean, I've just like crushed like probably thousands of hours at this point of just content that I did not like. You could not have paid me to care about this stuff a year and a half ago. It is mind-boggling how powerful it is, and how can something that powerful that is truly just pulling people that strongly to pulling me to carry this torch, how in the world can that fail? There's no way. No way. So
I share that
yeah,
sentiment, and I think about it all the time too, because I'm like, oh my god, I am so like bullish into this thing. Like I'm such a believer. Like, is it
yeah,
possible that like this is not real, or this is not?
yeah.
And with each passing day, that the possibility in my mind gets lower and lower.
I
Um,
know. And even then, I see what I'm doing, and I see people doing 10 times what I'm doing. And I'm like, how is that even possible? Like, just people just working tirelessly on this stuff. And it's there's always another Bitcoiner to outdo your dedication
sure.
to the craft. It's crazy. It's
Speaking of
inspiration.
speaking of which, what I heard you say in a couple of pods now that you go through classes at law school, but you're always thinking about this stuff. You can't get it off your mind. What do you beyond the writing, which obviously a lot of people appreciate and it's great? What's coming up for you, or what kind of visions of for your engagement in this thing that we've been discussing? Do you have any kind of clarity around that?
So, not a technical person. I'm a legal person, and it's still very early for me to, for any like good positions. I feel like that really use my abilities to kind of formed yet. So I'm still just waiting for the industry to mature, I guess. Um, what I'm doing in the short term is I will be working at Cato at their Center for Monetary and Financial Alternatives, doing monetary theory research, basically, about what properties are most important for a new alternative monetary system to beat out an incumbent. So, what are the monetary properties that would cause someone to drop what they're using and use something different? So that is what I'm really excited for, because Cato is a good place. They've got a lot of smart people there, but they don't have any Bitcoiners.
Right.
And you know, so hopefully something good comes out of that, and some research comes out of that I'll be able to share. But in terms of my personal life, I'll just be working at a nice place in New York, a nice law firm, and stacking sats. And in some ways, I feel like the most important thing you can do is just buy Bitcoin. Like, I don't think there's anything to. It's probably the most important thing for Bitcoin's success to continue is just like hodling
Yeah.
and buying and
Worry about the conviction and the
create those.
education
Yeah,
afterwards. Just fucking
yeah,
get your hands on some.
yeah. And we'll see. Anything else that's down the line, I'll definitely announce. But right now, it's just hodling, and I'm definitely going to be putting out some more articles, but I'm not quite sure what I want to write about yet. I have some ideas, but usually I don't know if I like them enough. Like they'll pretty much just like I'll get so annoyed with someone arguing with me about something. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna create an article that I can link to and just not have to deal with this anymore.
Right.
So
Why New York? Do you just want to be there?
it's a legal capital of the world, and it's where the best opportunities are, I think. So it's definitely not my first pick. I'd rather be in Austin if I had to pick a place.
That'd be cool,
Um,
man. Austin
there's
seems
there's a
like there's
bunch.
a lot of cool stuff going on down there.
I know so many Bitcoiners. I worked there 2 summers ago, and it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
And now that it's like a Bitcoin hub, it's even more enticing. But yeah, I'll be in New York for a bit, and then head for greener pastures.
Cool. Do you have a bit of extra time for the rapid fire questions, or I know
Let's do it.
cool. All right. So with these ones, answers as long as you want. You can pass if you want. So
Okay.
totally up to you. I'm just gonna hit them one by one.
Okay.
What is money?
Money is the language we use to communicate value and set prices.
If you had to explain Bitcoin to your grandmother or somebody over 80, what would you say?
Bitcoin is a form of digital gold that can be teleported anywhere and cannot be taken from you.
What's the primary reason why Bitcoin is important or interesting to you?
Um, because it allows new forms of human liberation and rights away from nation states.
What movie or song is most related to Bitcoin in your opinion?
Oh gosh, probably Kanye West's entire Yeezus album.
What's your favorite movie clip or rant of all time?
Movie, clip, or rant. The first thing that comes to mind is the greed is good speech. It's just something that people need to understand.
Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
Um, I think Bitcoin can certainly be delayed by either extremely uh, coercive government, you know, taking people by force, but I don't think it can ever be stopped. Once the idea is planted, the idea cannot die.
What was your most recent aha or level up in your understanding of Bitcoin? Something you learned recently?
I think understanding the nature of open source software and the fact that voluntary human interactions that are uncompensated can dramatically beat forcing people to work on something they don't really care about. And the cathedral versus bazaar moment is incredibly powerful and just further cemented my belief in Bitcoin.
What do you think will be Bitcoin's biggest impact on society?
Making it so people cannot print money and thereby making the political technique of convincing someone to live at the expense of convincing everyone to live at the expense of everyone else is no longer going to be viable, and therefore budget accountability will create much better human flourishing.
When, if ever, do you think the first central bank will start adding Bitcoin to the reserves, and will central banks exist in 20 years?
That's a great question. I think within 5 years, we see central banks buying Bitcoin. I think it will probably be a smaller bank, or at least I don't think it'll be the Federal Reserve. I think it will be something like People's Bank of China or someone that has nothing left to lose, a smaller bank. And the second half of the question was,
will they exist in 20 years?
20 years. Oh gosh. I think yes, a few of them, but they will be kind of relics of an old age.
What's the biggest mistake you've made with Bitcoin?
Biggest mistake I made with Bitcoin was probably buying Bitcoin Cash in the beginning and initially learning about Bitcoin through Reddit, which is mostly Bcash, and having to sort that out. And but ultimately, it just led me to understand Bitcoin even better. So it was ultimately good.
How do you feel about Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's creator, being anonymous and the coins that he likely controls?
I think that it's extremely important to not have a leader, and allows us to evaluate arguments on their merits instead of going to someone's reputation, which I think he would have a lot of influence over decisions in the protocol. The coins he controls and all lost coins really, I think, are going to be a significant event in Bitcoin's history. If quantum computing ever comes online, we'll have to figure out if we should fork those coins out or let the first quantum attacker get all several million lost coins, including Satoshi's. And I think that will be a very interesting point in Bitcoin's future, because we'll have to make a real strong decision about what to do with those coins and whether or not the 21 million cap should be upheld, or they are given to someone new.
What's the biggest thing you've learned about or change that you've experienced as a result of interacting with Bitcoin?
I have changed in virtually every way, but the root of all of it is being optimistic and motivated towards building a better world, and that verges on everything from being in better shape and taking better care of myself, to treating my friends, families, and loved ones better, to just wanting to learn at all times, to the point that I don't even like listening to music anymore, because I feel like I'm not having my brain engaged like I could if I was listening to a podcast about a variety of different subjects. So it's really been bizarre and super exciting.
Dude, it's so funny. I'm always, any opportunity I try to, excuse me, consume Bitcoin related content too. And I take some breaks. When I run, I often listen to music just to have a nice, break from everything. But I took my dog for a walk the other day, and I didn't bring my phone and didn't have headphones. And this sounds horrible because, yes, I like to smell the roses sometimes and hear the babbling brook and whatever. But I was halfway through the walk, and I was like, what the fuck? I didn't bring my headphones? Like, am I crazy? Like, this was like at 45 minutes. I have such a backlog of things I need to listen to, and I didn't bring it. I was like, damn it.
I relate to that so deeply, like that just crushing moment where you're like, oh, I'm 30 minutes in this car ride and I've got an hour left and I don't have my phone. Oh, yeah. It's bad. Yeah.
What is your most controversial or contrarian view on Bitcoin? Or sorry, view or opinion. If none on Bitcoin, any subject is okay.
Um, on Bitcoin, I I don't think that Bitcoin is going to be revolutionary because it's going to get rid of banks. I think that almost every average person is going to custody their Bitcoin with a Bitcoin bank. I think that the revolution with Bitcoin is the shift from central banking to just regular free banking, and that is where the real benefits of Bitcoin come from. Is allowing prices to reflect the natural state of the market and to avoid parasitic money printing. Um, but the self custody thing, I don't think that'll ever get to a point where people are going to actually self custody the majority of their coins. I think most people are going to custody it at a Bitcoin bank.
Ballpark estimate of Bitcoin's price in 5 years.
5 years? Oh man, that's like another halving. Um, I think I think we'll run up to okay. I would say kind of the way this trend would work is it's going to pop up to a couple 100,000 in the next five, and eventually settle around 60,000 5 years from now as like the bottom of the next bear market.
Do you have a morning routine? If so, what is it?
Do I have a morning routine? Wake up and listen to a Bitcoin podcast. It's basically like all I could get my mind to do is just like let something else think for me for a while, and generally it's one of the simpler ones like what Bitcoin did. Even though I love Peter.
How do you define success?
Um, Success is not having to worry about your family members being taken care of and having financial freedom to do what you want to do. And um, yeah, I think that's the key.
Most impactful book you've ever read?
Most impactful book. Um, I think the book that opened my mind up to just like appreciating alternative narratives is probably just the first book I read as a compilation of Nietzsche's philosophy. I think recently it's been Finding the Sovereign Individual and wishing I'd read that a lot earlier, because it's just so incredibly prescient. Yeah.
I'll reword this question because I don't really like it. But basically, based on your life experiences, things all that kind of stuff, what's one piece of advice you'd give to anybody listening, really? Was something that you just found was maybe impactful or useful in your life?
Wow, that is tough. My one piece of advice would just, when you think about humility, you need to think about humility not only in how you approach the world, but having humble ways of understanding the world and humble theories about the world. And I think this goes back to Taoism, it goes back to Austrian economics, it goes back to subjective understandings of reality, but uh, you should build your understanding of the world that factors in people's subjectivity. And I think that is the formation of a smart way forward.
And this question comes from young Nick at Nick Can't Mine on Twitter. In the future, when Bitcoin hits, let's say $1 million, what are you going to spend your Satoshis on that will benefit you or society?
I'm gonna buy a nice place in Wyoming and have my Bitcoin ranch.
Nice. I think we've all got some kind of similar view of that.
Oh yeah.
Uh, what's one question you'd like to see added to this list?
One question. Oh gosh.
What would you like to hear other Bitcoiners answer?
Do you think that Bitcoin citadels will, huh? My question, I don't, you probably have to reword it somehow, but the idea is, do we feel like our current political systems are adequate to be translated over to a Bitcoin uh, citadel or whatever nations come out of Bitcoin, or are we going to have to like come up with a new system of governance as well as monetary distribution? Our popularity contest, aka democracy, the way we decision make in the future.
Nice. All right. Very last part, word association. I say the word, you tell me the first thing that comes to your mind.
Awesome.
Satoshi Nakamoto.
Uh, George Washington 2.0.
Government.
Oh gosh, first thing I think is evil, but that's probably not right.
That's what came up.
Too big, too big.
Hash rate.
Hash rate, all-time highs.
The individual.
Sovereign,
Security.
fundamental,
Ego.
shed it,
Greed.
good,
Stacking sats.
safe,
Fiat currency.
decay,
Guns.
self-defense.
Altcoins.
Um, shit,
Pizza.
carbs,
Socialism.
tempting,
Family.
important,
Trump.
also tempting.
Libra.
Uh, too much of a compromise.
Gold.
Outdated.
Bitcoin.
The future.
Connor, that was fun, man.
Yeah, man.
Got you for 2 hours and 15 minutes now, so I think I'll let you get to your get back to your Friday. But I'm sure we could do this for hours and hours. So hopefully we'll do it again sometime, either in
For
the
sure.
flesh or another podcast like this. But is there anywhere you wanted to direct people? Twitter, Medium, anything like that?
I think the best place is just on my Twitter account. You can follow me at _Connor Brown _ and that's Connor with an ER.
Sweet. All right, man. Well, look, thanks again. This is super fun. Can't wait for the next one. And until that time, wish you all the best.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I feel like this was incredible conversation, and I can't wait to have more.
All right, brother. Take care of yourself.
Yeah. All right. Peace, man.
See ya.